Good morning. Good morning. It's Sunday on January 10th, 2021. And I'm wearing this shirt that my friend got. And it's way, way, way too big for me. But I already know in somebody's alternative accounting of who and what I am that I'm actually a very big woman. I heard them yesterday. They said that they bond people's body types. And what they did is they bonded somebody else's body type onto mine, and then they bonded my body type onto hers years ago. And that's why when I saw her several years down the road, I had more of her body type, and she was getting closer to having mine. And I've seen this a lot of times. I don't personally have a problem with my body. It grows, it shrinks. I'm in the course of modifying my diet. I'm going to have the body type that's appropriate for me, just so you know. But what's been going on is very obviously that for the last 10, more than 10 years now, going on 11, somebody specifically, strategically allowed for me to be used for experimentation under the auspices originally, I believe, of mental health. But the truth of the matter is it was also for physiological responses to and physical responses to various kinds of modifications of my environment, stimuli, and the impacts that those things had on my behavior and my personality. And somebody else out there has their entire ass hanging out because I have not produced certain results that were part of their initial thesis. And I know this. And see, part of me wants to do this thing where I replicate the personality profile that was genetically altered into me when Obama put into effect that executive order in March of 2016. That was a act of genetic engineering. I saw it, I felt it, I experienced it, and I've tracked it. And thus far, nobody has resized or canceled that executive order. And unfortunately, that executive order was connected to other acts of cyber terrorism that had completely ethnic identification indicators associated with them and that have been programming into our unconsciousnesses a very particularized experience. And the replication of that experience and the consistent programming of our actual experiences with other people that reify those racialized patterns are aimed at compelling us to modify our behavior and to accede and relent to accepting that specific kinds of racialized expression are what are actually appropriate identification of those racial or ethnic categories. There's a specific manner that a particular kind of African American has been programmed into when it comes to cyber terrorism. There's a specific manner in which white people have been programmed when it comes to cyber terrorism. There's a specific manner in which Hispanic versus Latinx people have been programmed when it comes to cyber terrorism. And the reification of these patterns of cyber terror have been going on long enough that people like me should already have been able to help those people that use me as a test subject get their doctoral degree. They should already have been able to have proven their thesis. And I should already have accepted and acceded to what the intended and permitted appropriate racialized expression was. And because I haven't done that so far, they have been prevented from being able to get that. And now we're in a situation where student loans that they took out for their education are impacted. Repayment on those student loans or being able to get the acknowledgement for other manners in which the student loan obligation was incurred and be able to get it acknowledged so that they can move on and get some other kind of credit or get some other kind of opportunity have been prevented because they wouldn't admit that they used me as a human test subject. It's very simple. Now, in a situation like this, I suppose there's a couple of ways I could take it. I could play into their medical modality and accede to accepting I have a disability, which would then give me access to a political community. And I've been struggling with this for 5 years because I do not see myself as having a disability, right? Was I incapacitated because I was targeted with directed energy weapons as political reprisal? Yes. And that should have been acknowledged. I would be able to acknowledge that. And I would be able to work with people in order to figure out things to help people biophysiologically and also deal with the trauma of being tortured. Telling somebody that they have a family history of mental illness and now it's been exhibited in their reality and they also have a mental illness and so they need people to give them treatment and they need programming and they're going to need to be given disability support, which means they also have rights as a disabled person. It's completely different than saying to somebody, regardless of what I feel about your political perspective, yes, you were targeted for political reprisal using directed energy weapons with the intention of incapacitating you to into relenting on your political position. And as such, there are certain things that are going to need to happen in order for you to be able to participate politically and or resume what it was you were doing before you were subjected to directed energy weapons. Who's got that? Who's got that grant? Who's got that grant? Who has the grant on how to address people that are experiencing the psychological implications of being tortured by directed energy weapons? Who's got the grant on how to assist people that have been subjected to neurological disturbances because they've been targeted with directed energy weapons? Who's got the grant on how to work with somebody in getting through the psychological trauma that comes with being repeatedly subjected to acts of cyber terrorism, including sex terrorism, because they were identified as a political dissident and actually were targeted in order to be eliminated so as to prevent them from being able to participate in a criminal prosecution? Because here's the difference between being somebody that has a perspective that somebody is politically unviable, and because they're politically unviable, then maybe that person feels that they would be better as a candidate for office as opposed to that person. And somebody that actually understands that person is a criminal and abusing the power of their political office in order to visit crimes on other people, up to and including capital offenses targeting their own constituents. There's a big difference psychologically. It's one thing to think somebody's a bad politician. It's one thing to think that maybe they hooked up some contracts and some kickbacks. It's another thing to think that they literally prescribe to a eugenicist agenda aimed at ethnically cleansing people, up to and including creating racially appropriate forms of political expression and allowing for illegal extrajudicial assassination of people who don't adhere to those pre-programmed, racialized expressions of political expression. It's a big difference psychologically. And see, this is why everything about your so-called diagnosis of me as having a mental disability is completely fraudulent. It was not about me having a family history of some sort of genetic indicator. Because right now, what you're doing is you're manipulating people's genetics on a massive global scale. And you've been doing it to certain of us prior to expanding it into other groups so that then you can test its efficacy and you can launch it on a global scale like you have. Does that make me maybe more akin to somebody in, I don't know, Liberia? Just with a different racially appropriate expression? I think it does. And so now we're in this very strange morass where your little plan Africa has kind of been falling flat on its face. And because you haven't identified who you are, and because you haven't taken responsibility and allowed for an actual negotiation in the contract that would have given you power over my life, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be able to help you get that credit you were looking for. I can't confirm the source origin of the transaction or the depository institution into which you intended to send it. Sorry. I apologize. I'm sorry. It doesn't matter how fat you make me. It doesn't matter how fat you make me.